As always, this is one take. Any images not belonging to the creator of this are being used in accordance with the fair use provisions of Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Proper sourcing is in the description below. By now you know the results of the verdict in Mr. Trump's second impeachment trial. 57 senators, including 7 Republicans, voted to convict. 43 voted to acquit. Mitch McConnell cited the fact that Mr. Trump was no longer in office, yet it was he who refused, as Senate Majority Leader, to hold the trial before he left. To those 43 Republicans, I have one question. It's a question I've asked of a couple of former friends recently. Were those 30 pieces of silver worth it? Was it worth your souls? Was it worth the damage you've caused to this nation? Was it worth the danger you put your families, co-workers, and staff in? Was it worth violating the oath of office you took, some of you for the first time, 43 days ago? Was it worth it? Many of you are Protestants, so I'll go with the King James Version. Mark 8:36. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the world and lose his own soul? Know their names, know the shame they shall forever bear, and above all, go out and vote like your life and that of our democracy depends on it, because it does. John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming. Marsha Blackburn, Republican, Tennessee. Roy Blunt, Republican, Missouri. John Boozman, Republican, Arkansas. Mike Braun, Republican, Indiana. Shelley Moore Capito, Republican, West Virginia. John Cornyn, Republican, Texas. Tom Cotton, Republican, Arizona. Kevin Cramer, Republican, North Dakota. Mike Crapo, Republican, Idaho. Ted Cruz, and I will be getting back to him later, Republican, Texas. Steve Daines, Republican, Montana. Joni Ernst, Republican, Iowa. Deb Fischer, Republican, Nebraska. Lindsey Graham, Republican, North Carolina. Chuck Grassley, Republican, Iowa. Bill Hagerty, Republican, Tennessee. Josh Hawley, Republican, Missouri. John Haven, Republican, North Dakota. Cindy Hyde Smith, Republican, Mississippi. James M. Inhofe, Republican, Oklahoma. Ron Johnson, Republican, Wisconsin. John Kennedy, not one of those Kennedys, Republican, Louisiana. James Lankford, Republican, Oklahoma. Mike Lee, Republican, Utah. Cynthia Loomis, Republican, Wyoming. Roger Marshall, Republican, Mississippi. Mitch McConnell, Republican, Kentucky. Jerry Moran, Republican, Kansas. Rand Paul, Republican, Kentucky. Rob Portman, Republican, Ohio. James E. Risch, Republican, Idaho. Mike Rounds, Republican, South Dakota. Marco Rubio, Republican, Florida. Rick Scott, who defrauded Medicare back in the day, Republican, Florida. Tim Scott, Republican, South Carolina. Richard Shelby, Republican, Alabama. Dan Sullivan, Republican, Alaska. John Thune, Republican, South Dakota. Tom Tillis, Republican, North Carolina. Tommy Tuberville, Republican, Alabama. Roger F. Wicker, Republican, Mississippi. And finally, Todd Young, Republican, Indiana. Ted Cruz, you are supposed to be a man. You are supposed to love your family and defend them. If Mr. Trump had said about my family what he said about your wife and your father, and then came back to me asking for a favor, A man would have told him to get lost. A man would have done anything within his legal power to make his life difficult if he needed a favor. You are not a man. And while you remember their names, remember their party. Remember the man they swore allegiance to ahead of their country. Remember that both sides did not do this. And remember the name of the police officer they respect enough to let the person most responsible for his death off scot-free. Until next time, the messenger.